You know, I was actually looking forward to listening to this album at the end of this month, October 2015. Escape the Fate usually isn't a band to disappoint, with the exception of a few songs off of This War Is Ours that didn't necessarily hit any chords with me or strike any emotions, but, through and through, Escape the Fate really haven't put out any duds. That is, until this year. 2015's Hate Me says right on the album cover what the band probably wants you to do. Hate it. And honestly, this is basically a 180 style change from what they were doing in the past. Honestly, they were doing some rock, they were doing metalcore, a little bit of post-hardcore, and then they switched it up to a more heavily polished and produced formula in 2010 with their self-titled album, which turned out to be my favorite album of theirs. But now we get into 5 years later with the release of Hate Me. It's all around bad. And I don't mean bad in a sense of so bad it's good, but I just mean it's jarring to listen to. I mean, I made it through Threat to Survival by Shinedown, no problem. I just kind of, went off and did my own thing while listening to the album, but this time I couldn't even do that. I actually had to pause the album in certain points and actually go back and listen to their older material just to kind of refresh my memory, just a memory, as to why this album is so poor. So to get into why this album is such a drastic downward spiral from even Ungrateful, which honestly it did impress me, Ungrateful did, but it wasn't anything nearly as good as what they had done in the past. Now we get into a whole new level. So with Hate Me, it has an overly polished, overly produced kind of feel to it where they're relying heavily. Craig relies heavily on auto-tune, and the band members just seem a little confused. Like, they're just kind of throwing things in there for no apparent reason. Like, there's a lot of really catchy guitar licks and guitar solos in songs like Just a Memory, Alive, and I think there's one in Hate Me, the title track. I'm not entirely sure on that. But there's a lot of different solos, but every single one of them feel misplaced or just put there as filler, just to kind of fill an empty gap, an empty void in the song, if you will. Now, this used to be the case a little bit on their older albums, where they would place solos in places where you wouldn't necessarily think they would fit, but on the older albums it actually worked. It actually helped the song build a little bit of character, build a structure of its own, such is the case with This War Is Ours and other songs like that. But basically, another reason why I don't like this album very much is because of the contrived lyrics. Every single song on this album has a little bit of a poorly written lyrical structure, as well as the words themselves not really making much sense or being just very broadly written in a broad scope. So, let me give you an example of such classy lines as "Those fuckers are gonna pay" from Les Enfants Terribles, which is supposed to be about my favorite game series of all time, Metal Gear Solid. Now, I actually looked up the lyrics for this. They're very broad. They don't really go into detail. They're talking about your scars and death before dishonor, and just very, very broad topics that could be applied to pretty much anything. Now, there's a point to where you don't want to be too specific, but there's also a point to where you don't want to be too broad in lyricism, and I think this is more on the broad spectrum, where it's just way too broad for its own good, and I can't really make heads or tails of how or why this has anything to do with what the band says it does. Now, they were very ambiguous with the first two guillotines, part 1 and 2, This War Is Ours. So they actually made those songs about Halo, but they had tiny little references of ambiguity in there. They had a lot of ambiguity. They had tiny little references of Halo, as in, referencing things like the Covenant and dropships and the like. But this, I'm not really seeing it. It doesn't really make much sense as to why it is about what they say it's about. But I guess, artist interpretation and all that, I can't really chalk it up to anything else. So, with this album as a whole, I would say it's definitely their worst album. It's a drastic step down from pretty much anything they've ever done. I only really liked 2 songs off of the album, Just a Memory and Alive. I kind of sort of liked the title track, Hate Me, a little bit, but every other song was just unbearable. I couldn't stand it, especially Let Me Be. I think Let Me Be and Live for Today, the dubstep song, are my 2 least favorite songs on the album. I'll start with Live for Today since it's first in the title or in the track listing. Live for Today is my least favorite song because of the fact that the way it combines dubstep, metalcore, and autotune just harkens back to Fashionably Late. And honestly, when they released Ungrateful in the midst of Falling in Reverse, releasing Fashionably Late, it was a no contest. It was a no-brainer. Ronnie was using autotune and rapping and all that other stuff that didn't really go well with metalcore. He didn't blend it in a way that seemed convincing or real or genuine. It just seemed like it was thrown together. And this is exactly why I don't like Live for Today, or the rest of the album really, bar the 2 songs that I mentioned before. Let Me Be is a different story. They try to pull off a little bit of a ballad, but it ends up sounding very generic and popish. Of course, Craig uses his auto-tune in there. And honestly, who is playing on this album besides Craig? I have no idea who this band is anymore. I know Monty quit. I know Brian quit. Or Ortiz quit. I don't know. Omar quit way back in the day. And honestly, I knew who was playing. I know TJ Bell and Craig Mabbitt are on the album. Everyone else is just a blur. Honestly, it's a train wreck. This band's lineup is nowadays. It's like one guy comes in, the other guy comes out. It's a revolving door. It's worse than a freaking production plant, honestly. So I have no idea. Maybe the influences from every band member that went through that revolving door didn't exactly mesh well with what Craig and TJ wanted to do, but I'm not entirely sure. I don't like the final product. That is my opinion. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 10. That's my final rating. This is Midnight Strike 3625. Keep calm and rock on, and if you want to listen to Escape the Fate, please check out their older stuff instead. Keep calm and rock on.